I'm Janine Anthony Bowen. I am a board governance expert. I have served on more than 13 boards in the last 20 years, and I've had leadership in more than half of those boards. I know governance, and we're going to talk governance today. Today's topic deals with the interaction between a university board and the university foundation board and the obligations and duties between the parties as set forth in the Memorandum of Understanding, the MOU, between the two. Now, the MOU should be clarifying the relationship between the parties and how they work together. And it must be drafted to withstand pressures when the parties lack alignment over obligations and responsibilities. So our case study today is the unfortunate litigation between South Carolina State University and the South Carolina State University Foundation over SC State's termination of the MOU between the parties earlier this year. So what happened? Well, let's walk through how this dispute developed. At a high level, this is not a single conflict. It's a multi-year breakdown over control of fundraising, funding, and institutional authority that led to this place where there's a termination of the MOU. The starting point, back in 2023, tensions began when there was a dispute over a request for supplemental compensation for the university president that was made by the University Board of Trustees. The university's position was that the foundation should provide financial support for leadership priorities. The foundation, in turning down that request at that time, indicated it did not have the appropriate funds available. It could not take on financial responsibilities that it could not fund, and that ultimately compensating the president was the university's responsibility, not the foundation. Now, at that same time, the university was indicating, hey, it's time for us to renegotiate the MOU. Okay, but from the outset, we have this disagreement about who controls access to foundation funds and under what constraints. Let's move forward in time. In November 2024, the parties ultimately do enter into a new MOU, and that agreement created a dual control model, which ended up being problematic. So the university led the fundraising strategy and the solicitation of donors, but the foundation held the funds, controlled disbursement of the funds, and had sole discretion on funding decisions. Now, this is the fault line, okay? Because both sides later relied on the MOU for different propositions around this same concept. The university says that they must control fundraising for accreditation and governance purposes, and the foundation indicated that they must control the funds to satisfy fiduciary duties. Now, let's keep going forward in time. In 2025, the conflict has shifted from theory around control to actual operations, the gala. So the foundation over many decades had held an annual fundraising and scholarship gala. In 2025, the university directed the foundation to not hold the event at all and instead support a university-led event that was very similar in nature. The foundation, after analyzing the financial implications for canceling the event at the time that the university made the request, decided that the consequences of cancellation were greater than the consequences of continuing on, and so the foundation conducted the gala anyway. Now, the university viewed that as a violation of coordination and alignment obligations required under the MOU, but the foundation's position was this is a legitimate activity that it had conducted over multiple years. At the same time, the university was raising transparency concerns because it had demanded a detailed accounting of gala expenses over the past several years. The foundation resisted providing that level of detail because it indicated that that request went beyond what the MOU required. The university kicked back, indicating that the foundation lacked transparency and accountability. And at this stage, the dispute has evolved to who controls fundraising, execution, and oversight. And the escalation continued in December 2025 and January 26. The conflict shifted to money and data. So the university discovered that donor gifts designated for the foundation had been held in university accounts, and they demanded an immediate return of those funds and a forensic reconciliation. The university responded indicating this is just a technical glitch. We'll get it cleared up, and it's part of ordinary operations. The foundation indicated that this was a serious custody and fiduciary violation. At this point, we see that the breakdown of trust just continues because this has moved to a disagreement over a direct conflict over custody of funds and donor data. And the breakdown becomes complete in January 2026 when the relationship completely breaks down. Within a 2-year period, the relationship just collapses. On January 20th, the university indicated that the foundation had 30 days to vacate campus office space that the foundation was conducting business in, and the university indicated that it was an operational necessity as they were doing construction on multiple properties on campus. The foundation viewed this as a broader campaign to undermine it. Now, just a few days after that, on January 23rd, 2026, the university formally terminated the MOU in 90 days notice, indicating a lack of alignment, a lack of transparency, and a need to protect accreditation. The foundation responded indicating that the vote to terminate the MOU was procedurally invalid and that the university had followed to fail the good faith meeting requirements in attempt at dispute resolution. And the final funding refusal happened in February 2026 when the university requested $1 million from the foundation. Foundation denied that request. Half of that million was for campus security and half of it was from NIL for NIL payments for athletics. So what led to all of this? Well, we had two competing constructs around the MOU. The foundation had authority and sole discretion over the funds. It was an independent entity, and the foundation had authority for gift processing and stewardship. The university controlled the fundraising priorities, authority over fundraising execution, and the ability to coordinate and direct activities. And this is where the tension lied, because the university was indicating the foundation had to support strategic priorities. The foundation was indicating that it had a fiduciary responsibility over custody and control and sole determination as to whether they would issue the funds requested by the university on an ad hoc basis. The problem is both of them were right. Okay. And the MOU lacked the mechanism to tie break when these roles resulted in divergent outcomes. No tiebreaker mechanism. So we had this dual model in one document, and no way to break the tie when there was conflict. What can we glean? First, there's got to be a way that the MOU can handle who decides when there's no alignment. There's got to be a mechanism for deciding who wins between the parties when the parties don't agree, and that should be specified in the MOU itself. It also should provide bright lines around execution and strategy. In this MOU, they combined the concepts, and so sometimes execution bled over into university responsibilities, sometimes strategy bled over into foundation responsibilities. There was no clear line. And so regardless of which obligations of the parties you set forth, there must be clear lines with respect to who has what obligations. There also has to be a formal dispute resolution mechanism. And so here there was not robust dispute resolution. There was an obligation to have a meeting within 30 days of the notice of termination, and that was it. There was no requirement to mediate, no requirement to arbitrate, no additional requirements beyond then terminating the MOU. So there should be a formal dispute resolution mechanism. And there should be standard financial reporting obligations. So the request for an accounting was not an unreasonable request, but the depth of the request troubled the foundation, and there was no indication in the MOU itself around what was required from an accounting perspective. And finally, there became a dispute over who owned the donor data. Now, all these gaps were what created the conflict. What's the key takeaway here? You should test your MOU against all of these items and to see if your MOU can withstand a conflict like this between the university and the foundation. We are hopeful that this dispute is able to mend itself, but the lesson for foundations and universities is to make sure that their MOUs are tight and can withstand pressures when situations get difficult. As always, let me know what you think.